As of yet, the items to cover in one or more of those meetings include the CLG report that we do annually to the Office of Historic Preservation, as well as the plan for the upcoming fiscal year. So I don't know if anyone has issues with any of these dates. We have in the past talked about having one meeting per month for, once we are finished with this process we're in, and like we did before, one meeting per month with the entire board, and the other date would be opportunities for subcommittees to meet and do their work because it's the dates on their calendar. So that's something that the HRB could talk about again.
Yeah, thank you. That's it. Okay, so then let's move on to the presentation about item number 2.
Thank you. Oh, this is Amy French, Chief Planning Official. So today, staff recommends that so we have today is the day for all of the properties for which we have received objections to listing on the local inventory. Among the objections that people have said, they also object to listing on a list, which is already out there on the webpage of properties eligible for the local inventory, even if the HRB has stated that they will not forward those to the council for listing. So there's a little bit of teasing out there to help folks understand what it means to be eligible. The list of properties that are already eligible and have been sent to the state 20 years ago and such for eligibility for the National and California Register, and then what it means to be eligible for the local inventory, which has no statement in our current ordinance as to what that means. In any case, today, the point of meeting is to provide a recommendation to City Council regarding the nomination of the city's property at 2601 East Bayshore Road. You might remember we postponed that at the December 14th HRB hearing to hear more from the city about that property. So I'll present on that today. And then again, as on January 11th, we talked about the HRB's ability to affirm the eligibility of properties for the local inventory based on the criteria set forth in the memos per our consultant and discuss those. We couldn't really discuss the properties that had objected on January 11th because that was for those properties that were on the 11th, not for all of the objections properties. So the HRB could discuss that today or continue that discussion with regard to what it means to be eligible for a local inventory, which is not covered under our current ordinance. And then to formally vote to decline to advance the objections properties, I call them, to the City Council for placement on the inventory. And that would be consistent with what the HRB voted on January 11th as a full board. I did a little bit of statistics here. From that Dames and Moore survey, we had 154 properties that still have integrity from the 165 that moved into this, that moved forward with recommendations from our consultant. 88 of those properties are single-family residential zoning, and so that was one of the focuses or instigating or catalyst for why we're looking at this, is because we were curious about the SB 9 legislation. So then 9 more properties were found eligible for California Register that were on that original Dames and Moore survey. And then 4 of those are zoned single family. So we've received 82 objections during this process, and that's about 50% of the total, and 51 of those are zoned single family. So probably 60% of or more of the objections are single family residential zoned. There are many other types of zones, including zones in the SOFA area, and that's another topic, but SOFA has its own discussion about properties and benefits to being, and review requirements for being eligible. So, and then one other thing is just to state again that some have stated that they would be interested in a district so that they could capture more homes on their street so they're not the only one, kind of thing. And that was not in our scope to go and launch a review of more homes or request neighborhoods to come forward to petition to be a district. I mean, that would be another entirely different process and more involved. So having said that, I'm going to just go to 2601 unless you think you would like to hear from the members of the audience who are here tonight before we
Let's do
this one.
2601.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we'll do public comment.
Okay. So I went out the other day and snapped a photo. It's very interesting to see this from, you can take a picture of this from the bike path there on East Bay Shore. And this was found by our consultant who is attending today to be eligible as a Category 1 local inventory resource under criterion 1, 4, and 5. There were 3 structures there that were demolished in 2017 and then another one in 2019. And yet the remaining building was found to still have integrity and still be eligible for the national as it was previously. Questions came up about asking for more information about the building, what its future use would be. So right now it's zoned PF, public facilities, with a design overlay combining district. And this, so any physical changes to that property would need to go through the site design process, which goes up to city council. The city is allowed to lease the property to any other party according to the PF zone land use regulations. And then the concern about hazardous materials, the other building that was demolished in 2019 was found to have hazardous materials, asbestos, and those were removed by a qualified professional. So it's, highly possible that the remaining building has asbestos. I have some information on the screen. It's a lot to read, so I'm not going to read it, but the Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plan is still in the CEQA process. There was a little bit of dancing around the topic of the building, and it was more of a general plan without specifically, because the use of the building was not known, and there was some controversy about preserving it or demolishing it. So just one final slide on this, and then I'll let Barrett speak to this property. Basically, I just found some stuff on the online on our permit tracker, and then I talked with CSD staff about the building, and there's some comments at the back. So this is a firsthand account that appears to have asbestos. There appears to be some black mold, and then she characterized it as a soup of hazmat that was dumped on the ground over the years. And there probably hasn't been testing out there. So there's many things about it that would have to be looked at. So I'm going to go back to this slide, and Barrett, if you would like to speak to the board on this.
Yeah, I can just summarize part of why we're calling it a Category 1 building and some of the information that's in that statement of significance for the building. This is the last remnant of the Federal Telegraph Company at Marsh Station, and that's part of why we think it is significant for its remarkable contributions to the field of radio communications that really had a national impact. That company itself was founded in Palo Alto in 1909 as the Paulson Wireless Telephone and Telegraph Company, and was really a pioneer in radio transmission and long distance wave transmission, which has really impacted the field of radio sciences and communications. So this is an internationally important history that has definitely impacted world wars, communication, knitting the country together. It's a really interesting history that really starts in Palo Alto and illustrates this technological development that occurred here. And that is part of why we're calling it a Category 1. It is an exceptional building with an exceptional history. It is already eligible for the National Register, so it is a historic resource. So I think some of the question is whether listing it on the local inventory helps to create additional opportunities for its reuse. And that doesn't mean that the building has to survive. That could be a situation where you're recognizing the history, and then if the building is lost in the future, there is some sort of plan to do interpretive work or have something about that history conveyed on the site for the public to really understand the significance of the site. And that can be apart from the building itself surviving. So I think that's kind of important to note as well, that the building is tied to this history, but if the building were to be removed in the future, that history could still be told. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And is it possible for us to just take public comment on this specific issue and discuss it and then move on to the rest of item 2? Okay, so is there public comment on 2601 East Bay Shore?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think these are all for objected properties.
Okay, thank you. So would we like to have board discussion on this particular item? Okay, yeah.
To clarify, is this structure and the land around it, it is owned by the city currently?
Yes, and it's subject to some regional oversight as well due to it being a wetlands.
Okay.
Probably should do this. I've been reading up on this building and there have been multiple reports given to the city. One of them has, I don't know what the status of it is, but it was written by AECom. And in their historical significance portion, they state that this building does not retain sufficient historic integrity of design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, or association, and no longer physically conveys its historic significance. Therefore, the station property is recommended to not be eligible for listing. So I agree with this report, and I don't think that we ought to keep this building, which has hazardous materials, is incongruous with the 123 acres of wetlands surrounding it. It was built during a time when no one cared about conservation. And so plopping something out, in the middle of nowhere sounded good, but we've kind of encroached that nowhere. And so, we ought to restore the wetlands.
I have two questions, or I have a question then a comment. Who is AECom?
They're a consultant that was hired by the city, and they developed the concepts for the former ITT property, Emily Renzel Wetlands.
Are
And
they a historic consultant or an architectural consultant?
They're a consultant that does architectural, historical, everything,
Oh, okay.
all inclusive.
Okay. I mean, it sounds from the report like the building is the last remaining of several structures. It sounds like it is a soup of environmental hazards. I also agree with restoring the wetlands. That all said, as I was thinking about this, our purview as the Historic Resources Board is to decide whether the structure or the site is historical or not and should thereby be recognized. Like Barrett said, even if this structure is demolished, there's an opportunity for interpretation on the site. And I think it's a really interesting option for interpreting how in early 20th century, the wetlands were used as basically undesirable land. And so warehouses and things like that went on them. And now in 2024, we know that this is an important ecological system. That's a great learning opportunity for people using the bike path, walking along here, even if the structure is demolished. So I personally will say, I think this should go on the local inventory so that history of what was here, and that interpretation can be made. I don't necessarily think the structure needs to be maintained or even be in existence, but I do think there is very credible evidence for the importance of this site.
I agree. I mean, we make recommendations to council about listing. So certainly if and really land use is not our purview. If there are land use concerns, council's certainly welcome to address those as part of their decision-making process. I think we need to look at the particulars of the site and the structure for listing. And in this case, I think that excludes looking at like a broader land use plan, because council will ultimately be making that decision about whether or not to actually list the property.
What does it mean to list the property? I guess I'm confused on that.
It's to include it on the local inventory.
But if the building's not there, why would you put something that's not there anymore? I mean,
I feel like our inventory is a record. It's an inventory. It's a record of what happened in Palo Alto. And I think that even hopefully, when I don't really see the Baylands being developed. So hopefully this building will survive in some sense, like the Sea Scouts building or some other unique structure on the Baylands. But the story that's there, even if you put up plaques, although we don't have demolition protection for inventory properties, but the reality is that life is moving so quickly that our kids really need every clue that life wasn't always like this. So I think that it's important to maintain our history in some form where people have access to it. And I think our inventory at the moment is our best shot at that. So I definitely support having this building on the inventory. It's a story that belongs in its place in the inventory.
I agree that this is part of the cultural landscape and the evolving cultural landscape of Palo Alto. We think that Palo Alto, just within the last 50 years, has become this technology beacon in the world, whereas this shows us that even at the turn of the century, there were huge innovations happening in Palo Alto. And even if this building is demolished, there's that story within the cultural landscape of Palo Alto was important in technology in the early 1900s. And we had different ways of thinking about ecological resources and systems then. And now we've come kind of, I don't know if I can say full circle, but we're in a different way of thinking about them. And that is an important story to tell on the overall cultural landscape of Palo Alto.
I also wanted to say, I think that it would be interesting to see what sort of adaptive reuse or what kind of proposal that the city would come up with, or maybe the city is going to lease that land to someone who's going to, do some changes or modifications or develop it. So I think at that time, when there's an actual proposal for the use of the property, it can be determined whether that building fits into that use or not, or if the building ultimately, doesn't have enough value to retain it in for future use. I mean, maybe sadly it would be demolished. So really, until there's a development proposal for that site, which I don't believe that there is currently. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's no proposal to demolish or to reuse
to alter it. Right. It's just, I mean, I would be for protecting it in its current state, just because it's there. There's no reason to remove it at this time. We all acknowledge, the process of something being historic, and then it's just like the Fry site where it was built for a certain use. The building itself might not be adaptable to, whatever it may be used for the future, but maybe that's not something that we need to decide right now. But I think definitely just preserving it in its state, because we've reviewed this project before. And I don't believe anything has changed on the site since we reviewed it before that I recall. But I also am very in favor of adding a historic preservation to just the site in general. You know, maybe the building is no longer there in the future, but we can always refer to this as the site of the original Federal Telegraph Company. I mean, just something like that would be a nod to and an acknowledgement of what was there and how it was used. And I think that could be an act of historic preservation, just to have it, whether it's a plaque or maybe maybe the city renames the parcel as such. So I think that could help preserve the history of it. But I think until an actual proposal for the site comes along, it's still subject to whether it fits into that readaptation or not.
Any additional comments?
I think despite everything that's been said, we need to do the soil testing and the hazmat testing on that building.
For clarity, I mean, even a listed property could be demolished if it's hazardous, correct? I mean.
That's right.
And listed properties could be demolished under other circumstances.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's not forget about Mike. I don't know, is he? Okay, there he is.
Yes, Board
Does
Member
Mike have any?
McKeenan.
Yes. This is Mike. I think the building does have significance. I originally looked at it and thought that it was kind of a derelict building, but after reading the history of it, I think it did have some very significant areas that we should take into consideration. It was actually noted that for the start of World War II, it was actually detected some what I assume to be foreign submarines off the coast. So I think it does have some significance that the building should be retained. I would not be in favor of demolishing at the present time.
Okay, thank you. Any additional board member comments or discussion?
Well, I was starting to say that the hazmat study should be done now to see if there are any hazardous materials leaching into the groundwater, because no soils testing has been done around it.
So are you just saying you're advising the city that they should do that because they happen to own this property?
Right.
Is there, okay. Could you note that, Amy?
So noted. And I think the soup reference was about the site as less about the building. So, you know, the site will be there whether or not there's a building. So, of course, that probably, you know, there's a process for directing, you know, Public Works or, you know, to do something like that. And it's not a direction for me, but I'll mention it to them.
But I think to that comment, I think when someone comes with a proposal for that site, whether it's the city wanting to redevelop it, or like I said, maybe the city leases it out to a big company that wants to use it, then at that time, that applicant would be required to do an environmental impact report and a historic evaluation report. So all that work will be done, you know, on an official level. I think at the time that someone determines what's going to happen on this site and has a path for the future of the site. I think right now it's just sitting there, right? And it's been there for quite a while, just as is.
Yes, there has been a discussion at the Parks and Recreation Commission, you know, and then members change and opinions may differ. So it's really, you know, broader than, as far as the use, broader than just the HRB's opinion on the matter. It extends to other boards and commissions and of course council.
Wasn't it, and I might not be recalling this correctly, but something leads me to believe that there was some discussion about it being a Boy Scout facility. But I could be just imagining that. I'm just remembering that from a past discussion of this site, but I thought I'd bring that up in case anyone else had that same recollection, but I could be wrong.
I wasn't talking about this site, but the Sea Scout building has been.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
Was in deep, deep trouble and it's been really nicely resurrected.
May I ask a question? So, Ms. French, you mentioned that this has also been discussed at the Parks and Rec Commission. Is there any communication that comes to this board so that they kind of have an idea what is being discussed at the other commission and boards?
I don't know if they're currently discussing this. I think it was years past.
In years past? I see.
Yeah, so I didn't go research minutes and reports from years past. Certainly, this is something I reached out to Director Kane, who's out this week, but to remind her of this coming forward today. I spoke with other CSD employees, and there was no mention that it's on the docket for Parks and Rec. Perhaps it will be after today. So I'll reach out again to Ms. O'Kane next week.
Sure. Just so that the boards kind of have an idea of what other boards are talking about or discussing, or some sort of a report in summary form, so all the boards are kind of kept informed about the discussion. Appreciate that. Thank you.
It's a very good idea. Thank you.
I mean, just another thought occurred to me, and I don't know if this is even relevant, but there's Peninsula Open Space Trust, there's Mid-Peninsula, and then there's Peninsula Open Space Trust. And I know that that's a totally different entity, but they take properties such as this, and I'm sure that they have a process of qualifying these sort of properties. Not that we would by any means let go of this property as a city would want to retain the property, but I'm sure that there's some protocol or some guidelines that they follow when they acquire, a property that's basically open space and we're basically preserving it. Maybe they have, I don't know if there's any guidelines or anything that we can learn from how they approach properties like this and what kind of steps that they go through to qualify it as a safe environment. I don't know, just a thought.
Thank you. I'll just jump in one more time and say, often there are grants available to help cities with their historic, with properties of significance, and that would be something that could be explored. We are a CLG city, and because we send in a report every year to the Office of Historic Preservation, there are grants that we can apply for to refurbish historic properties, among other efforts. So just put that out there. And there may be grants for cleaning up hazardous materials that the city could look into.
Any additional discussion? Okay. So then I'd like to move that we recommend 2601 East Bay Shore Road to City Council for listing on the local inventory as a Category 1 structure.
I second that.
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roman,
Yes.
Board Member Heinrich,
No.
Board Member McKinnon,
Yes.
Board Member Pease,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Board Member Wimmer,
Yes.
motion carries 6-1.
Thank you. Okay. Now moving on to the rest of agenda item 2.
So this is the objections properties that we have been tracking since, before November 9th. So you'll see here, we have 82 objections. 51 of these are single-family residentially zoned, shown in yellow. The list on the left shows the November 9th properties that before the hearing we heard, before the hearing we heard 30 objections. After we heard 12 objections. So the total there is 42. The red text shows the properties that we received after the HRB had recommended them to move to council. So those are, have been objected to now. And so they're on today's meeting. Then we have and staff sent certified letters as reported in prior HRB reports that we sent certified letters to the December 14th properties and the January 11th properties before those hearings. Unfortunately, we did not do that for the November 9th, the first batch. So then subsequently, staff sent out certified letters to those properties. My understanding that occurred last week, so fairly recently, or possibly the week before, to alert them to this meeting. And yeah, and then we sent notice cards, I believe, to all of the properties on this objections list that we had tracked at that point. We may have received, anyhow, this is the list that I'm aware of that we've been tracking. And so we'll leave it on the screen for a while. And of course, we publish our presentations on the HRB webpage. So we'll be publishing this after today. If we get more objections today, we'll add this to the list, and that will be published.
Okay, thank you. Let's take public comment on this agenda item.
Okay, first is Alan Cooper.
Yes, good morning again. I'm Alan Cooper, and I live at 270 Kellogg Avenue. I am owner of a historic property, potentially Category 1. And I have filed an objection to my house being listed on the Palo Alto Register. My reason for objecting is simple and basic. There need to be more incentives that are fair and equitable for both the city and the property owner. Earlier in this HRB meeting, I spoke about 6 possible new incentives to address my objection. I love my historic property, my home, and I have lived in it for 40 years. And I believe that it should be recognized as part of the history of Palo Alto. As such, 270 Kellogg should be on the register. I look forward to the HRB promoting new mutually equitable incentives and the City Council approving them. At that time, I will gladly remove my objection to having my house listed on the register. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to mention, we do have a community meeting coming up on February 23rd. And it would very much love to hear from homeowners who are interested in discussing incentives. Then we'll be talking about that at the meeting. Yeah.
I also would like to just clarify that you asked that one member of the HRB have economic interest, and there are criterion for appointing HRB members that do. So at the moment, there's several of us who have economic interest in historic houses.
Next
Yeah.
is Don Jackson.
Hello. I'll begin by highlighting 3 points from the revised letter from 31 local realtors that was sent last night. The realtors reiterate that the potential impact of a property being listed on the city's historic inventory may be a loss of up to 20% of its market value. This is not a myth. This is credible fact from experienced professionals. The only myth here is the ongoing belief by the HRB that a historic designation will increase or have no impact on its market value, a belief for which you have provided no evidence or data, and the HRB member bios on the website do not indicate to me that any of you possess professional experience with numerous local real estate transactions. I wholeheartedly agree with the realtors that there should not be an eligible list that is maintained by the city or the HRB. And if such a list continues to exist, that property owners should be provided the option to object to inclusion on the eligible list and their property removed. I did not ask to be on the eligible list, and being forced onto that list has subjected me to uncertainty and stress since this current process began last spring. The realtors point out the egregious conflict of interest created by the city using the same historic consultant, Page and Turnbull, both for assessing the eligibility of historic properties and subsequently requiring homeowners to pay the same consultant upwards of $10,000 to review and approve potential improvements or changes to their property. What a racket. For every property Page and Turnbull deems historically eligible, they ensure an ongoing income stream of future project reviews. It is no wonder that they find so many properties to be eligible for historic status. I believe this direct and obvious conflict of interest merits investigation and review by the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Finally, it seems to me that the owners of historic properties ought to be a key constituency that is supported and nurtured by the HRB. But your actions throughout this process have been the opposite, resulting in the majority of owners of so-called eligible historic properties strenuously objecting both to the current process and their property's historic designation. The HRB's actions have completely alienated many of us. Why did the board wait until the January 11th meeting to state that it would not forward or recommend objecting properties to council? You can and should have done that from the get-go last April and May.
That's 3 minutes. Please wrap up.
But instead, you dragged us through months of stress and uncertainty. Instead of attempting to steamroll our properties onto the historic register, the HRB should have focused on developing significant and material financial and zoning incentives for historic properties, updating and clarifying
Please
the
wrap
historic. Please do better.
Thank you.
Next is Michael Onken.
Morning. I just wanted to, this is regarding 132 Hamilton Avenue, and I'm one of the owners. My family owns it, and I would like to file the objection. I hadn't done that earlier. I have a signed copy for you. I have another copy if the council needs it. But basically just wanted to object. It's a commercial building. It's an office building. It's been an office building for 75 years. It looks like an office building. It's not really a pretty building. It's got windows and desks and offices. And so I know it had a prior use going back to the 20s. If somebody walked by, they would never know what that use was. There's nothing remaining of anything to do with the original use. So if it looked like a nice house, okay, but it doesn't. And it's all been changed. It was changed 50 years ago. And so there's literally no significance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, your objections noted. Yeah, thank you.
Next is Dan Marshall.
Good morning. How are you guys today? I just wanted to comment on the eligible designation. But first of all, thank you for affirming that we aren't going to be on the historic list. I appreciate that. In 2007, we purchased our home, began the remodeling shortly after. We immediately ran into problems with the planning department. First, we had no idea why. We planned to retain the beauty of the house, but we began to understand that there was some other motive affecting our ability to upgrade our home. I don't remember a disclosure of the designation of eligible, when we first bought the house. At the time, one bathroom worked. Most of the windows were painted shut, and there was literally 9 wasp nests that I eliminated one by one, and 2 of those were actually in our home. We quickly understood that our house was eligible for historic designation, and the planning department wanted to comment and require us to do certain things or to not do certain things. At one point, I asked, frankly, if I needed a lawyer because it wasn't clear at all where my rights ended and the city's rights began. And so they assured me that, no, you don't need a lawyer, Dan. Let's just work this out. Since our property was designated historic, the planning department felt that they had a right to comment. There were no rules or definition. And in the end, we compromised because we had no idea. And I think that's the problem with the eligible designation is nobody really knows what it means other than it's kind of a thorn in the sides of the property managers or the property owners that own their homes. And it could come back and bite us later. And so what we're trying to do here is just to eliminate that eligible designation And maybe the city ought to spend time on what, the people have talked about, building the community, building the historic, architectural, integrity of it. Secondly, I just wanted to say one thing, and that is, I do know that if we were historic or put on that list, it would reduce our value substantially. We bought a big lot, we didn't build it out completely, but there still is a substantial amount of build out that we could do on the property. So, the 20% I think is just, it's not real. It's kind of a myth. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening. Okay.
Thank you.
Next is Kasum Pandi.
Hi, good morning. My husband and I are owners of the house at 1965 Cowper. I'm just here to reiterate our belief that there should be no eligible status on the Palo Alto inventory list as maintained by the city of Palo Alto. I also had reiterated that belief in the previous meeting, and I just wanted to continue that. And then secondly, I respectfully protest the current opt-out system in place for homeowners to not have their properties considered for eligible status on this same Palo Alto inventory list. While we also, I appreciate Amy's office sending out notices. We got the notice for today's meeting a few days ago. So that was helpful, but for the previous meetings, we didn't receive any notice, which I had mentioned before. We actually got a postcard 2 days after, or sorry, a week after the meeting in November. And so I'd addressed all that, but I did worry for other homeowners that are being forced to opt out and by their absence had their properties listed without their knowledge. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. So that's it. Thanks very much for taking my comments.
Thank you.
Next is Darlene Yapley.
We disagree with affirming eligible Palo Alto inventory of 845 Waverly. Please do not conflate this with the National Historical Eligible List. The alleged significance is architecture, a rare surviving example of an early middle class residential building. Only 10 survey properties evaluated class, 1 upper, 3 upper middle, 6 middle class. Every property except ours was associated with the style of architecture, like bungalows or colonial. The survey asserts style and class, such as the square cottage and the bungalow, were among the predominant forms of residences that house middle and working class people. Another survey property looks like ours. I thought it was ours. It was not identified as middle class and is eligible because of their style. Our evaluation, a house whose principal significance has little to do with its style or decoration. Without style, how is our home historical or middle class? If class is the criteria, then it should be standardized for every historical home to determine rarity and consistency. Our middle class home is not rare. Today, 387 homes are on the Palo Alto inventory. 25 are 1,800 square feet or below, which is a proxy for the middle class. 25 is not rare. This does not include the 193 Professorville districts, which has middle class houses as well. Therefore, most historical and non-historical properties are middle class. Your survey states that mostly residents are middle and working class. 587 homes at 60% being middle class would be 352 middle class homes on the list. Should historical criteria use someone's subjective view of class defined by income, education, and social status? The 1979 survey suggested a historical district originally built for a lower social economic group. Although contiguous to Professorville, perhaps a residential district for domestic labor. I don't know about you, but I don't think an owner wants their property characterized as lower social economic. This is a sure way to bring the property value down. Class criteria is not a good look for Palo Alto. The 1979 survey by Beach and Bokosian, co-funded by the state office, researched and observed each property for significance bordering Page Mill, El Camino, the Creek, plus College Terrace. Here's the map. My property and others were part of this survey following all state regulations. They were not identified as historical. Why are the same properties found subsequently to be historical using different consultants? This is arbitrary. We reject finding our home as Palo Alto eligible. Middle class is an invalid criteria, subjective inconsistency applied. It is not rare. There are at least 25 to 352 middle class homes already on the inventory, Palo Alto inventory.
Thank you.
Next is Mala Narasimharajan.
Good morning, members of the Historical Review Board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Mala Narasimharajan, and my husband and I are owners of the single-family residence on 546 Washington Avenue. I'd like to bring to the attention of the board a couple of points. Number one, we are strongly in favor of removing the eligible for historic status label. We do not support an eligible Palo Alto inventory list to be created or used. If such a label is placed on a home and a list generated with those homes of eligible status, it directly affects home values, which will drop dramatically, maybe even more than 20%. We believe it is wrong for homeowners to pay the price for fairly subjective designations made by external parties with varying levels of misplaced incentives. Furthermore, this new categorization will limit property owner rights, thereby it should be removed. Any property labeled eligible for historic status as such burdens homeowners with the responsibility and expense to prove otherwise. This is a presumptive approach to historic status. It's not only burdensome for us as property owners, but it also disrupts the clarity and predictability that really needs to be inherent as part of a real estate process. Moreover, there appears to be, and what's really disturbing is that there is a strong conflict of interest to have the same historic consultants, namely Page and Turnbull, perform a survey to determine if a property is historic, and then also be hired by the city and residents to consult on historic design and preservation of those said properties for further improvements. This is blatantly wrong. Hence, we vehemently and strongly oppose any historic status, whether it be eligible or potentially eligible, being forcibly placed on homeowners against their will, thereby limiting property owners' rights and causing financial losses to homeowners. And this is happening due to unwanted labeling and identification of homes via lists and through tags of eligibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is John Bard.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is John Bard. I own a property at 947 Waverly. You may recognize me. I've been to about the last 6 meetings or so. One of the things I'd like to comment on is the entire process. Obviously, 6 meetings, that's a lot of time. My comments are going to probably sound familiar to you because I feel like I've been reiterating the same points over and over again. I do feel like the board has been willing to listen to us and to improve the process as we go along, but that's a little bit late for people like me that had started out at the beginning and have to go through every stage of this evolving process. What I think the board needs to focus on going forward is a more clear and consistent approach to how properties get identified for eligibility and then get moved to the inventory list going forward. I think what you're hearing from a lot of the comments today is that people are very concerned about what eligibility means. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have not codified the ability of homeowners to object to make sure that they don't get put on the inventory if they disagree with the designation for their property. If that were more clear, having an eligibility list would give you an opportunity to reconsider those properties and to have the homeowners reconsider participation in the inventory if you offer the right incentives. And that's the second part of my commentary here, is that I've previously said I don't think the incentives are significant enough to overcome the potential impact on property value. And I think it's unfair to force homeowners to accept that reduction in property value if they do not agree. And so if you clarify that homeowners could object and prevent their properties from being put on the inventory and being subject to the restrictions that we all see as adding cost to any remodeling, and also potentially as a devaluation going forward for resale, then that would make people more comfortable with participating in the process, being listed as eligible, and potentially agreeing to protect their homes by having them put on the inventory. So those are my suggestions coming out of my experience over the last several meetings, and hope that you will take those into consideration as you move forward. The second major point is that we don't know what those restrictions are. You still have to look at the policies going forward and how you would review suggested changes to those properties. I think once that process is clear, you may find homeowners are more willing or potentially less willing to participate based on how much that's going to make it complicated when they want to make changes to their properties. So that would be a second major initiative that I would expect you to take on going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Marion Odell.
Morning. I've spoken to you before. My husband and I live at 482 Everett Avenue. We remodeled it in sorry, can you hear me now? We have a house at 482 Everett Avenue. We purchased it in 1987 and did a massive remodel in 2006. We lifted the house, and actually the front of the house does not look like it did in when it was first built. You see another row of windows where we put an additional floor. We have chosen not to be on the historic registry. I sent a letter. Our house was on that first list of 68 houses. I sent a letter immediately saying we did not want to be on the historic registry. I don't see that our address is listed in red over here at 482 Everett. However, I did get a letter back confirming the letter that I sent. So I do want to make sure that we do not want to have our house on the registry.
Sorry, can we pause the clock for a second so Ms. French can provide clarification?
Yes, on the screen, I don't know if you can see it from the chambers over on that screen, but you'll see that the red text from the 11-9 hearing, those are ones that we received after the hearing. The addresses in black text there were such as your
before.
Yes, and yours is on there. 482 Everett is on the second column, second address down. So we did receive that before November 9th.
Yeah, so your objection's on record.
Great. I spoke last time and I've been to every meeting. I just want to make sure we are not on the registry.
Can we restart timekeeping,
I'm
please?
concerned that the council will designate our property to historic registry over our objections. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Charlotte Lowell.
Hello, and thank you very much for your time and effort on this. I want to say something other than just owner objection, and that's that even Homer nods. And so you can have a form that prevents, say, a prima facie case, but other information comes in. And to me, it's pretty clear Dames and Moore knows exactly how to describe a builder who goes beyond ordinary building. And they, for instance, say contributing as much as anyone to the look and feel of Palo Alto neighborhoods in the 1920s and 30s through the construction of small, well-built Spanish Mediterranean houses, identifying distinctive plan of massing, faceted bay windows, pattern, other aspects. My house is being designated, and I'm not saying I don't like my house, I actually do like it very much, but it's a Spanish colonial revival and important work of E.J. Smalling. And when I look at their description of E.J. Smalling, doesn't mention designer, doesn't mention that he goes above and beyond, unlike William Clay, who we're told, or not William, but practically all of his work has been of his own design and planning. So part of my question is, gee, if you have 20 houses or 15 houses that are Spanish colonial revival from this era, how does one get selected? And maybe a better way would be to say, here's these incentives, and some of those other people would like to opt in, because as I've said, they have copper gutters with those neat downspout straps and the funnel. I don't have that. And I think it would be nice if they had a chance to opt in, and for whatever reasons, because, you know, some building permit had been applied for, and so it was just maybe easier not to look at them because they didn't know if the front of the house was being adjusted or not. But my points are that, please, I attached the biographies to a letter I submitted late last night. Take a look and compare and see what's there for E.J. Smalling, because without looking at the other options, it does seem to me arbitrary and capricious to say that this house should be selected as a fine example. And at a minimum, please look at whether or not it should be category 2. I understand it looks like it's in good shape. And again, I like my house, but when we were repairing it and the plasterer could tell more, the brick walls on either side, 2 different masons said, you know, the brick comes right into the interior of the house. There's no separation there, which there would usually be. And especially because it is a well-built house. The rear fence, we've put pillars up to keep up the brick because we like it. And that's because it was built with single brick instead of double brick. The guy explained that. But I'm just saying, it's not that it's a perfectly crafted house, and it's not that it's not Spanish colonial revival. It's, I want to be able to repair my house. And if a tree falls on it. And I know that there's a feeling that it's really easy to do, but I can tell you, even just to get it.
3 minutes,
Okay.
please wrap up.
Anyway, thank you very much. And I would just, I think a blanket approving everything on the list is eligible isn't really a good process when other objections come. Thank you.
Next is Daniel Robertson.
Hi, good morning. My name is Daniel Robertson. I live at 643 College Avenue, which is in the College Terrace District. I live in a house that was apparently built in about, I think, 1914. My family, my great-grandfather actually purchased the house in 1956. So we've had families. I live there with my family right now. I'm a 4th generation Palo Alto, so I've been here for quite a while. I've seen a lot of changes, some changes that have been positive, some that haven't really been much positive for the community. I know there's a lot of people that come into Palo Alto because of the schools and because of the atmosphere and because of the environment. My neighborhood is an old neighborhood. A lot of the houses that I do see that are there have been either demolished or taken down by Stanford. And that I have a lot of questions regarding how Stanford is able to do that in Palo Alto. So that in turn has also made, I think, difficulties for actual residents of Palo Alto to be able to do anything to their houses. My house is very old. I still have the lath and plaster. I don't really have much insulation. I have a lot of old wood, old structure. I have an old barn in my backyard. My great-grandfather purchased the property off of the original owner. So I don't think in 1956, we knew that our house was going to be possibly designated as historic at that point in time. And so I know there's a lot of houses that are in my neighborhood from even 1894. I think my barn was probably built in about 1890s. It's ready to fall down. It could burn, it could fall over at any time. I can't do anything on my property right now without having to go through the planning board. Now I realize there's roadblocks that have been somewhat set up. I don't agree with being on the list due to the fact of this will give us two planning commissions to be able to do work on our houses. I know there's a lot of residents in my neighborhood that are having trouble already doing additions or adding on because of the Palo Alto Planning Department has made it difficult because they don't want to see bigger houses that are being put in. Yet a block up from me, there was going to be a 60-unit apartment complex with over 50 cars that were going to be there. And that's just a block up from my house, which are small residential houses. So I think we should definitely have a choice of whether we want our houses to be on the list or not to be on the list due to some of it's financial and some of it is just personal belief of what we are trying to do. And we're still trying to just live and have a life in Palo Alto. It's very expensive. To rebuild in Palo Alto, I think it's over $300 a square foot. So that alone has to be taken into consideration, I think, for individuals to be able to have a choice. And I think it's a choice that we should have. Every individual should have a choice. And that's what I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Martin.
Thank you, Chair Martin and former Mayor Koo. I'm glad you're here. Good. So I mentioned last time, my last meeting here, a lot of the regulations that we have is they're really based on our cultural value. So for example, San Francisco homes are presumed to be historic, prove that it's not. And so the rules are very clear. We've heard some people talk today about the idea of potentially or eligible for listing. That is confusing. I have clients that say, Martin, what does this mean? And they said, well, you have to go through a certain process. So I agree, it adds confusion and some moments of limbo. We'd say, we're eligible, but what does that mean? What were the rules? So I think that is something to pay attention to. There have been effects of, or comments about the effect of property values with historical designation. Some properties can apply for additional floor area ratio, like up to 250 square feet. That's in the ordinance. 250 square feet selling at up to $2,000 a square foot. That's a lot of value. So I don't see how that's a loss of value if someone can apply for that. Relief from floor area ratio, relief from setbacks, daylight planes. Some historic properties in a flood zone, you can keep your basement. That's a lot of property value. So there are benefits and incentives that are on the books already. So one of the keys, I think, is how do homeowners who aren't familiar with the exact language of all the ordinances, how do they learn about that? So I know we get a lot of information on environmental things from our utility bills that explains a lot of things and shows all the programs and the benefits of taking care of climate issues. So again, I think it goes back to education and what does it mean to be eligible? And like I say, I think I have a lot of sympathy for homeowners who see that listed and are trying to do something with their home, including selling it or even purchasing it. What does that mean? One thing that the city used to have is a designated historic planner. I'm thinking fondly of Dennis Backlund, where for no charge, a homeowner can meet with the historic planner at the planning department, ask all the questions and get very educated within 1 hour at no charge, the benefits or the challenges of historic listing. So again, I think it's education of, and then how does the HRB and perhaps even the city council emphasize that if it is a cultural value.
That's 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Vijay Chakravarti.
Hi, my name is Vijay Chakravarti. My wife already spoke about 546 Washington. I just wanted to offer a slightly, obviously I back all the objections, but I also wanted to offer a slightly different viewpoint and maybe try to understand the perspective of the board as well, right? Which is that the notion of history and preserving history, my first point is that that's very subjective. And I don't know what the process is for discussion around the notion of subjectivity and preservation of that subjectivity. For example, even in the wetland scenario that you guys discussed, I would argue as an engineer that the equipment that was used for detection is far more historic value than the building itself, right? And so the notion of what constitutes history and what can be changed, and can get into a ship of Theseus argument here, which I don't want to do, but I'd like to have more dialogue around kind of understanding why some decisions are being made, right? That's point number one. Point number two I'd like to make is that it's kind of very strange to have a concept of something being historical, yet also operational at the same time, which is a burden that a homeowner faces, right? So you could, for example, say, here's the Wright brothers airplane, and it's historical, but you would not expect me to go fly in that every day while preserving the history of it. Whereas in the context of a home, I'm actually living in that home, right? And that home, if I were to take a look at my own property, which is designated as being, Charles Sumner, I think is the person that designed it, I would argue, based on modern principles, I'm a fan of Christopher Alexander's work, that it's terribly designed. It's designed in a period when kitchen staff were, kind of considered not to be visible by high-ranking guests elsewhere. So the flow is terrible. The lighting is terrible. It's horrendous in terms of the type of use of materials, in terms of energy efficiency. I could list out a ton of criteria. So I do want to, have a discussion around, like, why do we consider that thing to be your value, right? And what are the points of value that the board here sees, which may or may not conflict with my notion of what value is, right? And given that I have to live in there and deal with, essentially a poorly designed home, what I consider a poorly designed home every day, I think that's a very fruitful dialogue to be had. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
And then we have two raised hands on Zoom. First is non-Levy.
Hi, good morning. Dear board member, during the November 9th meeting, you heard public comment from property owner requesting to withdraw their property, and we were loud and clear. Several reasons have been provided, which I'm not going to repeat here. One speaker shared the credible data that listing a property in Palo Alto can cost 10 to 20% devaluation. As the owner of 252 Copper, that means devaluation of the property by almost $1 million. This would be devastating for us financially. Please think about the consequence of our lives when making your decision today. We don't have intention to change or remodel the duplex. It will maintain its charming characteristic. This is why we bought it. So in our case, the only consequence of listing will be big financial loss on us, our private owners. Please give us homeowner an option to opt in or out, and please consider your decision that impact our life. I would say that as an owner of a property nominated of listing, I'm missing the clarity of the process moving forward. I know that the property is up for discussion today, but I don't believe I have a good understanding as for what possible outcome of the discussion today. I also know that it is not the board practice to respond to public comment, but after attending 2 meetings, including today, I wonder whether the board intends to address some community concern brought up as devaluating property and inadequate incentive. During today's meeting, some of the homeowners made comments about not having clarity of the process, no transparency, and confusing was the word that is used. I'm unclear of our property, Copper 252 to 52, if it has been removed from the list. I see the slide on the different columns and understand the objection has been made in different times. Are those going to be handled by the board differently? Again, missing clarity and transparency to the process. That this is a theme that came out today, and I hope that the board will consider that. It seems to me also that on one hand, we're rushing to nail down the list, but on the other hand, we're not ready with processes to support that. And that's another themes that came up today. So maybe we need to step back and define processes and provide the homeowner with more formal information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then next is Jessica Tsu.
Hello. Hi, this is Jessica Thong, homeowner at 360 Kellogg Avenue. First, thank you for not advancing properties to the City Council for listing on the historic inventory list over the owner's objections. However, I'd like to object to my property being categorized as eligible for the local Palo Alto inventory list and ask that a local eligible list not be created. The ordinance does not state owners can opt out of a local list, so creating an eligible Palo Alto list is a problem. I understand Palo Alto's desire to preserve historically significant buildings, but the ambiguity in guidelines and inconsistent application of historical preservation requirements makes me wary of being considered on any list deemed eligible for local inventory listing. Categorizing a property as eligible for the local inventory listing has tangible consequences for the homeowner, and being on an eligible list may result in a new categorization that may be used to restrict owners' rights. In our experience, being on the eligible list for the National Registry has resulted in adverse impacts to our property and our rights as homeowners. Similar to other homeowners who have commented today, when we renovated our house, we were continuously faced with a lack of consistent procedure and what seemed like arbitrary requirements by the review board in order to continue through the planning and construction process. We're also very concerned about how this will impact our property values as shown in the letter sent by the real estate agents. I'd also like to point out inaccuracies in the results of the 2023 reconnaissance survey performed by Page and Turnbull, which is being used to determine this historic list. One criteria for designation for my property was listed as criteria 5, that the building or architect was important, as the survey stated that a rear guest house on our property was designed by Burge M. Clerk, the architect of significance. This guest house is in fact not a part of our property, as the lot was subdivided many years ago, and this house is at a completely different address, 1450 Waverly. However, to my knowledge, 1450 Waverly is not listed as a historic property. Errors and discrepancies like these in the 2023 reconnaissance survey performed by Page and Turnbull make me concerned about the accuracy of the survey and how historicity of properties is actually being determined. In conclusion, I ask that an eligible list for the local inventory not be created. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional public comments?
No, that's all our public comments.
Okay. All right, I think we're going to close public comment at this point. Let's move on to board discussion.
Okay, I have a question. Amy, I feel like I've asked this before, so I might know the answer, but I honestly do not know. The inventory eligible list, is that a requirement of being a CLG? Is that something we have to submit to the state? Or is that just something that exists for the purposes of this process?
And actually, can I ask kind of a piggyback follow-up question here? I mean, the properties having been deemed eligible, my understanding is that is eligible for the state and national register, and that's what invokes CEQA. We as a board do not do that.
That's correct. From the 1997 to 2000 survey, those properties, which are the properties that have come through this process to see if they still exist and still have integrity, those were found to be eligible and were sent to the Office of Historic Preservation back in the year 2000. So to the extent that there have been additional properties that were identified in the survey as potentially eligible, and folks came through, and due to our comp plan policy that says we cannot issue demolition permits until we find out if the potentially eligible properties are actually eligible. That's been, policy 7.2 in the comp plan. We've been doing that. So those properties have been sent each year as they are found eligible and found ineligible. Those have been sent to the Office of Historic Preservation as well. So there's a list that is a state database.
So if a homeowner had concerns about their HRE for the purposes of like California register eligibility, how would they go about modifying that? is there a process with the state of filing?
I'm going to ask Barrett to help us know what the state's process is to remove from their database.
Yeah, so that would be a process of delisting, and you have to provide evidence either that the integrity has changed or the property has been demolished or that the reasons for listing additional information has come to light, and that needs to be documented and then submitted to either the keeper of the National Register to remove that eligible for the National Register or to the California Register.
Great, thank you for the information on that.
So to be very clear, in other words, Palo Alto's eligible list is only created because it is a requirement of being a certified local government by the state. Yes or no, or something in between before I go on.
The obligation of a certified local government is to maintain the list of properties on our inventory or on a local register. That's part of being a certified local government. And it is a requirement to report annually to the state. Barrett perhaps could weigh in on the nuance of your question better than I can, whether a city must have properties. I don't, we wouldn't be a certified local government if we didn't have historic properties on a list, I suppose. I don't think I'm answering your question.
No, it's okay. So I guess my question for Barrett would be, Barrett, like, is there any way to, again, in hearing the questions from the community, is there a way to do away with the eligible list in Palo Alto? And if so, what are the ramifications?
Well, I think one of the things from hearing the public comment that I also think maybe we need to clarify, I think there's confusion as to whether the properties that are not moved forward at this time for the Palo Alto inventory would become like listed on a separate list in the city's records, that they are eligible for the inventory but not listed. And I think that is one of the concerns, that it's creating an additional category of potential eligibility versus being eligible for the National Register, which all of these properties already are, including the ones that we found did not have integrity. Those individually, I believe the homeowner would have to submit information to the keeper of the National Register. And that's something that we could follow up with the state office and see if they have a process by which they could remove a larger number of resources if the city wanted to forward essentially a list of all the properties that have lost integrity and just update those records. That's an avenue that could be explored.
Yeah, because I mean, I think what I'm hearing here is that by virtue of state or national eligibility, the properties are, they're identified in that way and are therefore eligible for CEQA. And being eligible under state or national categories also strongly suggests that you would be eligible for local listing. And, while we intend for the objector properties, to not be forwarded to council, that state or local determination still stands. And that is a thing we cannot change as a board.
Yeah, I'll weigh in as well. I think, we published a list of properties that were going through this property on the webpage. Those are addresses that our consultant determined still had eligibility or still had integrity and therefore still eligible for the national state register. That status is not proposed to change, though a property owner may wish that to be the case. So thank you. I'm glad that's been identified, what the process is. Certainly the city could take steps with those that our consultant identified as no longer eligible to assist those property owners to have those properties removed. I'm sure there's a way we could help with that. So
yeah, and it seems like I am thinking of our last public commenter where they think that their assessment was inaccurate because that is no longer part of their property boundaries. It sounds like they may want to engage with the process for dealing with a state or local nomination that really may not apply.
And I'll just add one more thing, and I think maybe the only reason for the HRB to state that the objections properties are eligible for local inventory is so in the future, this process doesn't have to happen again. It's a blanket, ability for those homeowners that are going through this process to come return and perhaps go straight to council with a request to be put on the inventory, and rather than have more HRB hearings to consider what category and what under which criteria and that kind of thing. I mean, that was the purpose of doing a large group like this, so we go through it once.
Well, because we didn't look at the ones that we had owner objections to, we kind of missed that boat. But I do think this is something we should follow up with and clarify over the things. And I think what we really need to do is before our next meeting, divide it into not categories, because we're using that word for something else. Divide it into R1s and commercial and RM whatevers, and actually be really clear about how being on the inventory versus being a historic resource not on the inventory. Because I think, unfortunately, and this happens a lot in life, you assume the worst. You don't know, so you assume the worst. And I do it. Everybody does it, I think, or most of us. And I think because we don't have I hate saying this, kills me. Because we don't have any demolition protection in Palo Alto, there is really not a lot of difference aside from incentives for being on the inventory and being a historic resource that's not on the inventory. So before our next meeting in a month, I am going to put my nose to the grindstone and see if I can clarify what the differences are for each of our properties. And I know some people have said, we're not invested, but yes, we are. And it's personal for us too. So hopefully we can do a good job of convincing you that being on the inventory is a cool thing and a good thing. And it's a nice status instead of an obstacle.
Can I do a what if scenario? So let's say that your property is put on the eligible list, but you have opted out of being listed on the inventory. If we
Clarify eligible versus identified as are we talking about the second list?
No, we're talking about eligible here.
Okay.
And then we're talking about being put on the inventory list.
Okay.
There's two separate lists now, correct?
Three.
We have a published list of properties that our consultant found eligible for listing under certain criteria and for which category on the inventory. Those properties include the objections properties, I'm calling them, where we have received objections.
Okay,
so the objections received sometimes say that they don't think they're even eligible under the criteria identified.
But right now we're saying we're going to vote on two different items. One is the eligible list and the other is the inventory.
For the properties for whom we've received objections only.
Right. But let's say a property owner has submitted an objection and they remain on the eligible list. And should we finally do fair and equitable incentives for the homeowners and they want to be put on the inventory from the eligible list, will they have to pay a fee to do that?
Our city processes are set up that, this has been funded for consultant assistance to go through the process. When, as I understand it, if owners individually come forward and the HRB has not identified them as eligible under certain criteria, we would have to individually come back to the HRB for this process for those properties that did not want to be recognized as eligible for the local inventory. They still remain eligible for the national and state unless other actions are taken by the owner.
If they want to opt in later, they have to pay a fee?
Yes, that's how our system is set up because it has to cover the cost of staff, reports, notifications in the paper, notice cards, all of those things that we've been doing as a batch that has been authorized by council to do.
I mean, is it possible to allow folks to come back, without going through this process again, but also leave the door open for, folks who have delisted themselves from the state and national registers to say, if, we find the work of the consultants to be valid and that the eligibility to be consistent among the properties we've seen. However, for properties that may no longer be eligible for the state and local register, that they could then, fully, kind of remove themselves from this process.
It's a very awkward conversation about removal from process, removal from inventory. It's very complex, and I have a hard time answering all of the questions about this. I don't know if Barrett has, who, works for many cities, helping them with their inventories, might have some ideas. I don't know if Isabel is also on the line. She's also experienced in historic preservation and processes. I guess our process is not super clear about what to do if you find that your property is no longer has integrity. It's not written in the 1978 code. We have not changed that ordinance since maybe the 80s. I don't know.
Do we have a process for delisting? I know of at least one property that has done that.
Yes, we do bring properties forward, but it's not super clear. It's not in the ordinance, and so it's just let's make it up as we go kind of thing that happens.
Do any of our consultants want to share any thoughts on this?
I think it's difficult with the individual property owner either coming forward or wanting to be pulled off that some on the groundwork needs to be done, and just in terms of assessing that. So I think it would be hard to say that like no fees would be in play in that scenario. And to Amy's point, it does need to cover staff time for the process. I think any property owner who right now is objecting, but in the next year or so it says, oh, the incentives have really improved, I want to be listed. Obviously, few changes would have occurred to their property, so it might be more likely that something simple could be done to just kind of affirm the findings and move it forward. But I think that kind of needs to be a time-bounded situation.
So it would be difficult for any of the properties that have registered objections to come back a few years from now, like in any case, and request listing on the Palo Alto inventory without paying associated fees and having their property looked at again.
I think this is a topic that would have to be weighed in. The council would have to consider this and decide if it wanted to set up some kind of grace period or what have you.
Okay, so this really isn't even us at this point.
No, I mean, Barrett's contributions are important because, yes, if somebody comes back 2 years, 3 years from now and they've built a second floor without, any kind of historic review, then, we need to take a look at that property and do an evaluation as to whether it still retains integrity.
Okay.
And building a second floor is possible for historic resources. I want to make that clear. But we'd like to be able to review its compatibility and under the Secretary of Interior standards when it is on our list.
Additional comments or?
Chair,
yes.
if I might, when I'm hearing the discussion, there's a lot of confusion. So from being identified where Commissioner Hendrick was being identified, there's a difference between being identified and becoming eligible. So I was wondering if there's a chart that shows from the point of identification, and then what is the process? And then where does it go on which eligible list does it automatically go on to? Is there such a chart somewhere?
Well, all of these properties previously were found eligible for national and California. And so that's not a point of discussion that we're discussing, the HRB is not set up to reverse those. Only the properties that our consultant found are no longer have integrity. Would we, I was saying I could figure out how to help all of those properties to come off the California and National Register eligibility, but certainly we could, for the February 23rd community meeting, help people understand that even if they've objected to listing, and we have the list in front of us, those properties are not coming off the California and national eligible list. We're not doing anything about that.
I understand. Yeah, I understand we can't, which is, and that was a part of our ordinance and our comp plan. And I often kind of think about, why was our ordinance not updated? It's not part of the priority of having it updated before jumping into this endeavor. But that's neither here or there, but thank you.
Actually, I think that is a here or there. I think we really should update our ordinance before we jump into doing this listing. We need to get the fair and equitable incentives. We need to have those first, have our community discussion, and then come back and do a vote. So I would like to defer this decision today.
So I understand we've already sent we've sent the non-objector properties to council already. What we can do today is follow up on our vote from the last meeting to reiterate that properties with registered objections will not be sent to council for consideration.
Why would
Do we want to do that?
Why would we need a reiteration if we've already done that part?
Last time we provided like a vote showing our intention, but this would be the official vote. So I'll make a motion. I move that properties with registered objections will not be recommended to council for consideration for listing on the historic inventory.
I second that.
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roman,
Yes.
Board Member Heinrich,
Yes.
Board Member McKinnon,
Yes.
Board Member Pease,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Board Member Wimmer.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay. So I hope that provides clarity for homeowners and property owners here who are, concerned about the status of their property as part of this process.
I'll just add in that I was carefully looking at all of our lists for the 3 meetings and making sure all of the people that spoke today about their objections, and we have this objection that we received in person, all of those will be published in the list of objection properties. So if they're not, I think this is the only one that's not on the list of already received objections.
And property owners could also at this point theoretically object to council.
Correct. Even those at the HRB, just like the HRB already recommended moving forward on the ones we did not receive objections, those properties can come forward with objections before we go to council. We do not have a council date. We are first, looking towards our end of February 23rd meeting to have further conversations about incentives and what happens under the existing ordinance, et cetera.
Somebody mentioned a real estate letter that came in last night. Is that something where would we find that?
I was at a public meeting last night and I wasn't looking at emails last night, but I did look at it during the meeting today and it looks like it was sent to City Council as well as the HRB. So that will be published on both the HRB webpage and the council webpage. And I could certainly look for that and forward it to the HRB. Any correspondence that's come in last night while we were at another meeting.
Anything else? Or Can we move on to the study session at this point? All right. Let's move on to the study session.
I need to reach out to our city attorney's office.
And actually,
excellent.
just for, I know that some
Right
of
on
our property owners are heading out now. So February 23rd, 6 o'clock, I think. Is that 6 o'clock, correct?
Yes, 6 o'clock, and we'll have some refreshments
Yeah.
out before 6.
We're going to be talking about incentives. Yes, in the community room here. Okay, now study session.
We are setting up for the next item, which is a refresher on conflict of interest and communications. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Caio Ariano. I don't know if you all have met. Oh, are we missing members? Okay. Okay, we're doing a bio break?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think board member McKeenan may have stepped out, but I don't know if we can, call him back under the circumstances. So I think we should start. Yeah, let's get started, and I think he'll be back.
Caio Ariano from the City Attorney's Office is here to
Welcome.
give a refresher.
Hello, good morning. Nice to meet you all. My name is Caio Ariano. I'm the Chief Assistant City Attorney in the City Attorney's Office. I've been with the City of Palo Alto just about 2 years. I advise principally administrative services, which is finance, real property, Also the Public Works Environmental Services Division. And then I am the second attorney advising Planning and Development Services with Albert, who you all know and had some conflicts this morning, so I'm standing in for him. I have been practicing municipal law for about 15 years. Before Palo Alto, I worked for the city of Santa Clara, the city of San Mateo, and then with a private firm that was the city attorney for Santa Cruz and Half Moon Bay. So I've been doing Brown Act trainings for quite some time, and I've sat with city councils and planning commissions and advised various bodies on kind of the ins and outs and pitfalls, and here this morning to talk about just a few reminders and maybe some tips and tricks for you all to think about as you all do this very important work on the HRB. So next slide. Okay, thank you. Brown Act. This is the basic open meetings law for local government agencies in California. The state has its own open meeting law. It's basically the same, but so when we, your folks in Sacramento don't have to follow this Brown Act, but they have basically the same rules about holding their meetings publicly and publicly accessible. So the language in italics is a paraphrase from the statute. The key components of the Brown Act are these three. The meetings must be in public at a regular place and time. The agenda for the meeting must be posted in advance, and you are not allowed to discuss any items that are not on the agenda. And there needs to be an opportunity for public participation, both on the items on the agenda, but then a separate opportunity for members of the public to address the body on anything that is not on the agenda. Anyone who has been to city council meetings, that should be pretty familiar to you all. You don't need to worry that much about those procedural requirements. We have staff from, in this case, planning and also the city clerk's office who do an excellent job at that work, preparing the agenda, noticing, setting up the room in a way that everybody is allowed to be here, attend virtually, and provide public comment and participate in the meeting. So we have all of those bases covered. The two biggest questions, actually, can you go back to that previous slide? Sorry. The two biggest questions, if we're looking at this language in italics, are you a legislative body? And is what you are doing considered a meeting? Because if both of those things are true, then we need to follow these procedures. So that's really the rub here. So you can go to the next slide. Let's see. The bullets here are kind of different examples of what is a legislative body, right? So you hear that term and you typically think, oh, that's just the city council. That's not how the definition reads. It gets into more detail. And legislative body is defined in the Brown Act to also include any appointed bodies like the HRB or standing committees of the city council. So even though you are not legislating, so to speak, you're not adopting ordinance and things like that, and you are not a standing committee of the city council, you are still a legislative body as defined by the Brown Act. So other legislative bodies, really any boards and commission included in the municipal code, because those are established by the city council, any advisory bodies created by the city council action. So by resolution, might not necessarily be in the municipal code, but created by formal action. That is a legislative body. And then there are also some subcommittees that can be both a board or commission subcommittee or a city council subcommittee if that subcommittee has what we call continuing subject matter jurisdiction. So you sort of carved out a special job for that group, and they kind of serve as kind of the intermediate or advisory body to the whole subcommission on a specific subject matter. And if that subcommittee has a fixed time and place of meeting. So a little technical, but we help you all through that. Just something to keep in mind if, for example, you all wanted to establish a subcommittee to sort out some, some particularly thorny issue where you don't have the time to discuss as a full board or a full board, and you want to delegate some of that work to a smaller group for efficiency's sake. Work with us, make sure that we are not running afoul of the Brown Act when you do so. Next slide, please. When does the Brown Act not apply? So it does not apply to your individual discussions you may have with members of the public or the staff. Why? Because you're not meeting as a board, right? You're not, it is just you talking with your neighbor or Amy on something that is important to you. Communications between less than a quorum of the board or committee. So that's not a meeting because there's not a majority of you present. That's one of the kind of criteria for something to be considered a meeting. It has to be 4 or more of you. And then ad hoc subcommittees. Talked about that just a minute ago. So this is the most important slide. Talked about what a legislative body is. Pretty straightforward, I think. Less straightforward oftentimes is what is a meeting. And this is the main thing you have to worry about is, you want to make sure that what you are doing or you are not unwittingly doing something that would be considered a meeting as defined by the Brown Act. So the statute defines a meeting as a majority of members at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate on any matter within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. So things like this, very obviously a meeting. All of the procedural requirements apply. Things like community meetings, conferences that you may go to, community events, where there is a majority of you all. There is an exception to the meeting definition within the statute that says, well, we recognize that you are private individuals as well, and you like to go to certain events, or you are a member of the community who is interested in certain events, and you may have overlapping interests, and a majority of yourselves may find yourselves attending these events. That's okay. That's not a meeting, provided you do not discuss any HRB business. That's really the most important part. So, a new ribbon cutting at a city park or event, a children's little league game or school play, you find a fellow HRB member there, that's okay. You can say hi, you can acknowledge one another, but what you really want to be careful not to do is discuss any HRB business. The 2 most common pitfalls are in this lower left-hand box, serial meetings. If you take nothing else from our conversation this morning, it would be, or it should be, that please do not reply all or send to all any emails. It's the most common way you can create what is called a serial meeting under the Brown Act, which is kind of like that game little kids play telephone. That counts. Once you hit a majority of the board, you have a quorum. And if you're discussing things that are within your subject matter jurisdiction of your body, that counts as a meeting. And if you didn't do all of those procedures, have it out in public, do the agenda, things like that, then you are violating the Brown Act. So please do not do that. Second most common would be social media. So you can be on a social media post or message board next door, something like that. If more than a quorum of you also happen to be on that thread and one of you voices an opinion, chimes in with a comment or even a like or dislike, that is potentially considered discussing or deliberating on a matter within your subject matter jurisdiction. So please be very careful about how you participate in social media when you are looking at any topic that is HRB related. Let's see. I think that pretty much covers this slide. So last thing, let's test our understanding a little bit. 3 members of a 7-person commission are on an ad hoc subcommittee. So 3 out of the 7. The chair of the commission, who is not on the subcommittee, wants to discuss their progress. Would this be a meeting under the Brown Act? So, volunteers, victims, anyone want to work through the analysis with me? Okay, so that's the conclusion, right? Yes. So what's our analysis here? Why would this be a meeting? Quorum. It's only 3 members. How do we get to a quorum?
Chair.
Correct, yes. 3-member subcommittee, you're okay. The chair makes 4. That's a quorum. That is a meeting. And then for the A+ answer, is there anything else in this hypothetical that makes us doubly sure that this would be considered a meeting under the Brown Act?
A+. Wait, can you repeat the question?
Yes, so for the A+ answer, is there any other fact in this hypothetical that makes this jump out at you as saying, yeah, this really is a meeting, besides the quorum?
Right. If a chair wants to discuss their progress, is this in real time, or what if the chair wants to discuss it with one member of that subcommittee?
And board member Pease gets the A+. That's the ambiguity here, right? If it is just one of them, arguably not, because you don't have the quorum. But if it is all of them, then yes. And if you want to go even more inside baseball, it's this question of discuss their progress, right? That's their subject matter jurisdiction. And so you are essentially doing subcommittee business without complying with the procedural requirements of the Brown Act. So A+ for board member Pease, A's for the rest of you all. Really nice job this morning. Any other questions?
Well, I don't know if I understood your last answer. So if the chair just talks to one member, is that acceptable or that's not acceptable?
That would be acceptable because you do not have a quorum.
I would add to that at any time, it is very appropriate to send any communication to me as the liaison to the board. And so that you don't take a misstep that you're, that may come back to bite you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, okay, got it.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. That's a great point, right? What do? I'm on the board, and one of my neighbors sends me this email that I think is really important and a great point that ought to be shared with the board. Do not forward it to them. You can reply and copy your staff liaison, Amy, in this case. Thank you for your input. I'll make sure that this gets to the board. Amy will then include that in the packet materials so that everybody gets it, including members of the public who look at the packet, the agenda packet for that material.
And just also to note that our webpage, thanks to recent interest by the public to have a greater transparency on our webpage, similar to a commission, we have now made adjustments to all of our planning department. We have 3 commissions to put the public comments. So we will publish anything that's sent to the HRB is published on our webpage. And then if there is any, anything that looks like a serial meeting might have happened, we're trying to avoid it. But if that happens, I do publish those then on the, you may have noticed on the webpage saying board communication. So that would be, an MO on my part as the liaison to show the public, what has been discussed. But we try not to need to do that. So.
And
thank you.
And there's nothing to prevent members of the public from emailing you all as a group as well, right? They're within their right to do so. Our responsibility is to make sure we are not discussing or deliberating outside the context of a noticed meeting. So thank you for the communication. Save any discussion for when you all come together to act on that item.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any, sorry, I keep interrupting. Just after you talk, I would like to have a question for the entire board.
Oh, well, I just was wondering, so you have a 3-person subcommittee that desires to have something agendized and wants to communicate that in order to get it agendized. What is the proper procedure?
I would request that be sent to the liaison, me, for in my communication with the chair. I would have that discussion with the chair about, the appropriate meeting to bring that forward, any, work that needs to be done by staff to support that request, this kind of thing. Sometimes agendizing something for a meeting, it needs to be considered which agenda to put it on, future date, and advertising. So if something needs to be advertised in the newspaper, we have, a time frame for which that needs to happen. That kind of plays into what I was going to ask the entire board is if you are having a subcommittee meeting, I think that's a nuance as well, that if it starts to be, a regular meeting such as this question of property values, right? If you're listed and there might be interest in having that discussion on a subcommittee, but, at some point, if it becomes a regular, we've suggested maybe that alternate Thursday where the board is not meeting. If that ends up being a regular, every, second Thursday of the month, the subcommittee on property values is meeting, then that starts to be something we need to advertise,
Okay,
right?
just so I'm clear here, typically you meet with the chair and vice chair for a pre-meeting, say Monday before our Thursday meeting.
Can you go on your mic? Sorry.
Typically you meet with the chair and vice chair on Monday for a pre-meeting before our meeting on Thursday. If a subcommittee wanted something to get agendized, and I understand staff has to look at that for whatever reasons it has to look at, what typically would be the timeline in order to get that done?
Well, because we publish our agendas at least 72 hours in advance, that, would be too late. If there was something that came up the Monday at noon, which is often when the chair and vice chair would meet before an HRB meeting, that would be too late for that Thursday's meeting to place it on the agenda because we've already published the agenda. We do have a section on reports from officials and this kind of thing that can be general topics, but so some, a subcommittee could report out on something, but then it wouldn't be a discussion because it hasn't been advertised. Would you agree with that, Kaio?
Yeah, that's right. I think there's kind of, if I'm understanding the question correctly, there's maybe two issues, which is how do we as a subcommittee put this on the board's agenda? And what's the lead time for doing so? So Amy addressed the lead time. Agendas, what is our publication deadline ahead of time? Is it 10 days like the council or?
Well, 72 hours in advance, changes can be made to an agenda and posted online. So I would say by 8:30 Monday morning for the week, the Thursday meeting, if there was a known topic that the HRB wanted to discuss.
So that's your timing. The procedure would be what Amy mentioned. So you as say the subcommittee chair could contact the staff liaison. Perfectly acceptable.
Okay, just so I'm a simple person, I really understand this. If an ad hoc subcommittee gets together and decides in an ongoing process that there's urgency, they believe there's urgency, they would like something agendized, and that subcommittee meets on Wednesday, if whoever represented that subcommittee was able to make that request by early morning on Monday, it would be possible to get it added to the agenda with your ability to get that published in writing and online. Is that right?
Well, I mean, early morning Monday is only as good as somebody is working before 8:30.
Right.
And that's
Okay.
not a realistic expectation. So I would hope that communication would come by, at least Friday,
Okay.
the week before the Monday, because then, it's relying on me working on my day off and everything else.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good point.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, and now let's move on to the meeting minutes from the December 14th meeting. I'm going to actually not participate in this discussion because I was not there. For those who were there though, if there are comments.
Sorry, before we get to meeting minutes, I see that we do have a member of public in the audience. I don't know, because we did agendize the Brown Act refresher. I don't know if somebody is interested in commenting on that item.
Do we have public comment on that? No. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no one in person or online.
Great. Thank you. All right. Okay. Yeah. So December 14th minutes, comments, corrections.
So packet page 24. I think we just got some extra words in the second motion down. The second line where it says addition to Equality Health Palo Alto Local Register. I don't know what the health thing is going on there, but I think it came from something else. Okay, so I'm on the packet page 24. Can you identify it that way, Amy? Oh, okay. Sorry. And the second motion by the vice chair. And the second line, addition to Quality Health. Are those just
Seems
extra?
like, yeah, the words equality health before Palo Alto seem to be an error. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to go and watch the tape and see what that was, because I don't know what that is.
I mean, it's quoting me, so I can say redact, right? Like those are erroneous. I don't think I said that.
Equality Health has no business in this sentence.
No. I thank you, Board
The
Member
word
Willis.
"the" could be substituted, perhaps?
What?
The word "the."
Yeah. the Palo Alto local register.
Yep. Okay. That's what you said, probably.
Probably.
And if you figure out what you did say, let us know. Curious. I think that's all I had.
All right, thank you.
Oops, sorry. I'll move to approve the, oops, do you have other corrections? The minute draft minutes of December 14th as amended.
I'll second that.
We're taking a vote.
Hopefully.
Yes. Board Member Wimmer,
I approve.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Board Member Pease,
Yes.
Board Member McKinnon,
Mike, you're on mute. Mike McKinnon, you're on mute. You can mute yourself.
Yes.
Board Member Heinrich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roman,
Yes.
and Chair Eagleson Cheslowich.
Abstain.
Motion carries 601.
Thank you. Now, are there any additional announcements?
I more have a question. So I got a notice from the November meeting where my property was nominated. And I just want to clarify, it says your property will be heard again on Thursday, January 25th to reaffirm eligibility for local inventory listing and voted on for recommendation. Did we do that? Are we going to do that?
I think I know what this was. I didn't thoroughly look at the message in that letter, but the intent was all of the November 9th properties that didn't have a certified letter like we did for the subsequent two meetings would have a chance to receive a letter and by certified process, right? So so that they could be aware that today, if they hadn't been following anything at all, they could tune in and object, basically, because that's how, just like the state, we've been proceeding on an objection basis.
Okay, yeah, that works for me. I also want to say that I thought this was a little dense. Maybe I'm getting old, but I think it was a little less, and it might be a little more user-friendly.
I agree. I think there's a lot of information there. I was out on vacation last week and I did some quality control, but I did not. I admit I was going down a slope.
Can I just pass
on my
this down
skis.
so others can see it?
Yeah, I'd like to see that actually, to see what actually you received. And then just again, I'll note that we have planned to send certified return receipt or whatever process letters to all of the properties that have been nominated for which we haven't received objections. Again, to state, so we'll make a very nice letter in the next week or so and make sure everyone knows.
If you need help.
Sure, make sure everyone knows about the February 23rd meeting as well, where they can voice their ideas and concerns about the incentives in the ordinance and the confusion or whatever.
Yeah, I think this sounds like more of an agenda discussion if we want to.
Yeah, this is becoming an agenda item. So I think we need to not look at this. I'm not going to look at this. We can put it in the packet. I'm not going to look at this. So we can put it in the packet and it does not become an agenda item.
Thank you. I'll report to Kaio that there's been an A+, and it was not me.
Is there something?
Yes, Darlene did want to speak, but
it's not.
No, but this is board member questions and, on the minute?
So the minutes were approved and now we have somebody that wants to speak to the approval of minutes that already happened. So through the chair, would you like to reopen the minutes approval of December 14th? So that we can have comments from the public?
Sure.
this isn't going to change the approval of the minutes, but in the previous meeting on the 9th, there's been a lot of communication about what communication we're supposed to receive, the certified letters, the postcards. I think it's very unclear what people have actually received. In fact, I've never gotten anything except the 2 postcards and a letter on the 11th, 9th meeting. I've never gotten a reminder of the 25th meeting. A lot of, and I don't know if that's because I am objected, so I don't get the notice, but I have not gotten anything since 11/9. And I just think going forward, it's, people have spoke about getting confused. They got things after the meeting. They don't understand what they're supposed to go to, not supposed to go to. So I, just as a positive comment, and it's in the minutes, what was communicated that people were supposed to get. I'm not sure we know what we're supposed to have gotten. Many people haven't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can the vote on the minutes stand? Do we have to?
Yes, the vote on
Okay.
the minutes can stand, and we will do our best to help everyone understand through this next set of, the notice cards that may or may not have gone out to everybody that objected about this meeting today. The intent was to, again, reassure them that, that their objections had been heard. We've told everyone that submitted an objection, and I don't want to go off the agenda topic, but that it was received. So,
Okay, so thank you. All right, are there any other announcements just for the end of the meeting here?
Yes.
Well, I can clarify.
Wait, no, we can't. I think this is off
Just
the
read one
agenda.
line of the agenda for Darlene.
I would not. This is getting into official business. I know.
See me.
Okay, so the announcement I have is PAST is starting their spring walking tours again. And so if you go to their website, you'll see all the different neighborhoods and the dates and times. I didn't write them down because I think there is still kind of influx with some of the neighborhoods, but it'll be posted on the website.
Super, thank you.
Saturday mornings?
Member Heinrich, would we consult the past website to see when those are?
I just had a quick question. I know that the next time that we'll all be together will be at the community meeting on February 23rd. Is there anything that we should be doing in preparation for that, or is it just going to be an open forum? I assume it's just going to be sort of a carbon copy of the last 2 meetings. It's just an opportunity for the public to come speak.
It's going to be discussion of incentives. We want to hear from the community what, they would like to see, what would make having their property listed, perhaps more appealing.
So it's just an open forum to receive their feedback and thoughts and information.
Yeah, and we can certainly talk about what's available currently too, but.
Okay.
So if anyone has, just to try not to go on an agenda topic that isn't agendized, if anyone has ideas on the HRB of what that meeting could be, or what you would like to see, or what makes sense to you, please email me directly, just me, and I will compile all of the ideas that come from all the members of the HRB. Okay, if you could do that soon, because we do, it takes quite a while to develop each and every packet, to provide notice to the newspaper, et cetera.
Yeah, and I do mention the incentives because we've talked about that in the public forum. I think we've announced that. Yeah. Okay. We're ready to adjourn. I move to adjourn.
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.